Aerospace in Washington, soaring great heights for nearly a century. The successes.
Aerospace is 15% of our economy.
Setbacks.
We've had a lot of ups and downs recently.
And now a promising future of flight.
Oh, I think Washington's number one priority needs to be to create jobs universally.
Tonight, in a KIRO7 Eyewitness News special, Boeing and beyond, the future of flight in our state.
We are surrounded by history here at the Museum of Flight, a history that has shaped and dramatically changed our world and economy. Hello, I'm Steve Rabel.
And I'm Angela Russell. For the next hour, we're going to give you a front row seat to the state of aerospace in Washington, including Boeing's starring role and what it means to all of us. The business of Boeing. Today, the company represents 9 out of 10 aerospace jobs in our state.
Whether you're a Boeing exec or you're a Boeing employee on the shop floor, which I have both on each end of my street, and that's just how it is around here.
But Boeing workers aren't the only ones benefiting. We all are. Boeing brings economic contributions, money, jobs, and security for everyone living in our state. It's even a major part of culture and education. So what's next as Boeing pushes to keep us the jet city of the world? Coming up in the next hour.
We have the best engineers in the world. You can't go hire them someplace else. We got terrific workers here. I mean, they work magic every day on these airplanes.
The Executive Vice President one-on-one, his take on the company, the new planes, and its labor force. Also, from passenger planes to military jets.
The defense products aren't necessarily as visible, but they certainly are as important.
So what's on the horizon for the aviation industry, its planes, and its people? Oh, Boeing insists it is here in Washington for the long haul.
In a rare sit-down interview, KIRO7 Morning News anchor Chris Egert talked with Boeing's head of commercial airplanes, Jim Albaugh, about the future of passenger aircraft.
The 787 Dreamliner has gotten much of the attention the past few years for its trials and tribulations. But it is by no means the only thing going on at the commercial airline division of Boeing.
Hi, Chris Egert with KIRO7.
And we got the rare chance to sit down with Jim Albaugh, the president and CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, to talk candidly about the Dreamliner. Albaugh took over commercial in September of 2009.
Understanding that you inherited this particular aircraft, looking back, do you feel like that there have been mistakes made to this point?
Well, maybe I inherited it, but I own it. And, my job, working with the team is to get this airplane delivered. When this airplane is delivered, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to be an airplane that people want to ride on, and it's going to be an airplane that airlines are going to want because it's so much more efficient than anything flying today.
While the Dreamliner may be making the most news lately, let's put it all into perspective. Boeing hopes to produce 10 787s a month by late 2013. Compare that to the 31.5 737s that workers are currently cranking out. By 2012, crews hope to roll 2 747s a month off the assembly line. Workers are able to make 1 767 per month and plan to be building 7 777s a month by the middle of next year. To date, more than 7,000 orders have been placed for the 737. Guinness World Book of Records considers it the most produced large commercial jet airplane in aviation history. And production will be ramped up even more by the middle of 2013. Company officials say the step up in production will mean hundreds of new jobs at the Renton plant. But it is no guarantee that the next generation of the 737 will be built in Washington.
They have done a great job, and they're going to continue to do a great job as we ramp up to 38, and who knows, we might go beyond that. We're a long way from making a decision on a new airplane. When we make that decision, we'll decide where we're going to put that line. As I mentioned before, there are no entitlements on where we're going to put work, but clearly we understand how good the team is here. We understand the capabilities that they bring, and as I mentioned, this would be my first preference. But we have to be competitive, and we have to make sure that we can deliver on our promises to our customer.
What they, the customers, need and want is exactly what Boeing is weighing right now on the 737. The company is yet to announce if it will re-engine the 37 to make it more fuel efficient or perhaps introduce a whole new airplane.
Well, I know there's a lot that's been written about that recently, and we have not made a final decision on whether or not we're going to re-engine or not. I will say, though, that we've talked to a lot of airlines, and we have not seen a lot of enthusiasm for re-engineering this airplane. We think we can do incremental upgrades to it. We think that most of the airlines would be willing to wait, say, another decade for a brand new replacement airplane that could get a 15 to 20% improvement versus what they could get through a re-engine. And I've said that we'd make a decision this year. I'm not sure if we will. We want to make sure that whatever decision we make is the right one for our customers and the right one for Boeing.
And now in the 737 class of planes, Boeing is feeling the heat from Brazilian plane maker Embraer, Canadian-made Bombardier, and China's Comac.
How big of a threat do they pose to Boeing?
Well, first of all, this is a very exciting time to be working in this industry. We're moving away from a duopoly. We're going to have multiple competitors. I think competition is good. It makes us better. It will make the competition better, and it'll be better for the airlines and also the people that travel in airplanes. We always assume that people are going to be successful in what they're trying to do. You know, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but we can't have a strategy of assuming that our competitors are going to fail. And our strategy is one assuming that they will be successful, which means that we have to have a more capable airplane in all the markets that we're in. You know, while Bombardier, while Comac, you know, while Embraer are working on what I'll call today's airplane, we need to be working on the next generation airplane.
While the 737's future gets all sorted out, the 15-year-old 777 line faces a new challenge from an old foe. Allboss says they'll officially announce possible upgrades on the 777 once they see if Airbus can come up with what he calls a credible contender.
Well, I'll tell you what, right now it's the most efficient and the most modern airplane in that market. And now I will grant you that on paper, the A350 900 and 1000 you know, could rival it, and in the case of the 1000 maybe be a little more efficient. But we're going to defend that marketplace. We are not going to allow you know, Airbus to move in and take that market share away from us.
And just a few weeks ago, Boeing announced another delay in the 747-8 program. It, like the Dreamliner, has had its share of kinks to work out.
This is an airplane that, again, is going to be the most efficient airplane in its class. We got into flight tests and we had, you know, 3 issues, none of which aren't addressable, but issues that have taken us time to work through. But when you're doing a development program, sometimes it's not about just throwing money at the issue. It takes time. You got to fly the airplane, you got to validate the design, you've got to prove to ourselves as well as the FAA and the customers that you understand the root cause of the problem and that you've got the problem fixed.
Now, again, back to the 787, the first airplane ever built out of composites and built from parts made around the world. It was unveiled with great fanfare on July 8, 2007, 787, but it is yet to be delivered to its first customer. Boeing now predicts that won't happen until mid-2011.
And it's easy in hindsight to look back and say, yeah, we made some decisions that weren't right. I think we overreached on technology. We went into the program without some of the technologies being as mature as they probably should have been. We had a schedule that was aggressive and that we didn't have enough time in there for contingencies, for addressing the issues you always find on a development program. I think we made some errors in putting much of the work outside of the Boeing company that in prior aircraft we'd done inside, and as a result we lost some control.
Now, one of the things that ruffled a lot of local feathers was Boeing's decision to build the second 787 assembly line in South Carolina and not in Everett. And while the tax incentives that South Carolina provided sweetened the pot, many believe that decision was based on ongoing labor disputes with Western Washington workers. During our half-hour interview on the final assembly line of the 37 in Renton, Allbaugh downplayed the effect that the strike had on the Dreamliner and tried to paint a pretty good picture on the current state of labor relations.
And I think if I were to walk around and ask the average worker out here, how are we doing working together? Everybody wouldn't say great, but I think most of them would say that we're getting along pretty well.
Maybe here, but would the workers in Everett say the same thing?
I think a lot of them would, yeah, I do.
Because we've heard things from them about grumbling, of course, about the South Carolina decision, that was a bad move.
It's interesting, you know, South Carolina is part of Boeing.
And so is Western Washington. All of it, not just aircraft manufacturing facilities in Renton and Everett.
Thank you for calling Whistle Workwear. This is Desiree. May I help you?
Look no further than the Whistle Warehouse stores, spread out in 8 different Puget Sound locations.
You know, all about being seen.
They sell all sorts of gear to Boeing and other aerospace workers.
If they're doing well, we're usually doing pretty well too.
And many Boeing workers spend their boot allowances in Whistle Warehouse stores. Another example of just how big Boeing's footprint is in our state. An entire economy laced up and tied together by aerospace. I'm Chris Egert.
Joining us now here at the Museum of Flight is KIRO7's aviation analyst, Scott Hamilton. Scott, let's start. First question. Jim Albaugh has been placed in charge of the 787 program. Is he the right guy in charge to bring this program back to where it should be?
Well, I think he is. The fact that he's an engineer by profession is a stark contrast to Scott Carson, the previous Boeing commercial CEO. Scott was a salesman and a finance guy, well qualified, but not an engineer. Albaugh's an engineer.
How likely is it that the problems that the 787 program has had will actually help Western Washington in the sense that said, you know what, this wasn't a good idea, all this outsourcing? Will we see the benefit of that?
Well, Boeing has already announced that they're bringing some of the engineering and the production of the 787-9, the larger version, back to Puget Sound. So obviously that's going to be a good thing as well.
You've talked, we've all talked, the importance of the 787. It's gotten a lot of press. But the real money plane for Boeing is its 737 and has been for years. The redesigned 737, is that going to happen in this state? What is it going to take to keep it here?
What it's going to take to keep it here is a long-term labor contract, and Boeing has been real clear about that. Jim Albaugh made it real clear for this program that there is no entitlement for that airplane to be here in Puget Sound. There has to be some sort of labor peace, and that's even transcended the long-standing complaints about the business climate.
Okay, Scott, thank you. Well, still to come, is Boeing and its workforce on the verge of another strike? We'll take a look at the labor unions, the tense relationship with the company, and why workers could walk off the job yet again.
Also, a look back at one of the most memorable flights in the history of Washington. It's happened only once in history and was part of seafair excitement back in 1955. Boeing test pilot Tex Johnson pushed the limits, cruising about 450 miles an hour in the 707, known as the Dash 80 back then. The plane dipped its wing and started to turn over, rotating until it completed a full 360-degree rotation. What Johnson did helped launch the passenger jet age by showing off the high quality of the plane that Boeing assembled. And that, of course, required a major labor force. But Boeing and its workers don't always see eye to eye.
That's right. In fact, KIRO7 has just learned there is, once again, the possibility of a strike. Reporter Rick Price found out when the next one could happen and why.
The junction between Boeing and its union workforce is a point of friction, generating real heat. In 2008, the machinist union struck for 57 days over job security, pensions, and the cost of medical insurance. It was the 4th machinist strike at Boeing in 2 decades. In October of '89, the machinists struck for 45 days. In 1995, an even longer strike, 69 days. In 2005, a 28-day strike. In 2000, SPIA, the engineering and technical unions, struck for 40 days. All those strikes have led to tough words from the highest levels of the company.
But we have to be competitive, and we have to make sure that we can deliver on our promises to our customer. and not have the labor stoppages.
But International Machinist Union President Tom Buffenbarger has said that by putting the second 787 line in South Carolina, Boeing is inciting another strike in 2012.
We're trying to get back to a positive relationship, but we can't do it by ourselves.
Since the 2008 strike, statements from Boeing's top management have sounded to the Machinist Union like threats to move work out of Washington and like blame for the entire delay on the 787.
A 57-day strike does not equate to the delay of the airplane over 2 years now. I mean, that just isn't good math. Commercial Airplanes CEO Jim Albaugh acknowledges the delays go well beyond the strike.
You're never going to hear from me, blaming the work stoppage in 2008 for the reason we are where we are.
One of the roughest issues, outsourcing. The unprecedented amount of outsourcing on the 787 both concerns and angers the unions at Boeing and their members.
How late is the 787? It's not working very well at all.
Though Boeing last month announced it would bring some of the work back, at this point it's unclear what work and how much of it. SPIA Executive Director Ray Goforth.
And we're cautiously optimistic about that. That's one of the large mistakes that the company made when they set up the 787 business model was to outsource great sections of work that they'd never previously outsourced.
The outsourcing even figured into the deal to keep the 787 final assembly line here. The state paid millions to help convert 4 used 747s to Dreamlifters, which bring big parts in from suppliers around the world. Problems with this global supply chain have factored heavily in delays that now add up to nearly 3 years.
If we were waiting for the partners to still provide us with completed sections of the airplane, we probably wouldn't be up flying today.
Ratcheting up the tension, that decision to put the second 787 assembly line in South Carolina. Cammie Bryan works on the 787 in Everett.
And to have them give away those jobs to people that haven't been doing it is just boggles the mind. I mean, really.
Not all Boeing workers are in a union, but most here belong to one of 2 unions. The largest is the Aerospace Machinists, currently more than 24,000 members at Boeing in the Puget Sound area. They rivet and bolt airplanes together, do wiring, plumbing, and connecting of systems. They move parts around the factory and inspect for quality. The second largest union is SPIA, the Society of Professional Engineering Employees in Aerospace. There are about 21,000 SPIA members in Washington. They are the engineers who design the planes. They are also technicians who do non-engineering work in the factory that requires technical degrees or certification. That includes some design, laboratory, planning, and test evaluation work.
With the union job, good paying job, I have more time to spend with the family. I have more capable to pay for my kid to go to college.
I'm a single mom, and without the health care and the wages that they are and the guarantee that I have a job is very important.
Boeing insurance documents we found on the web show union workers pay lower deductibles and lower out-of-pocket maximums for the company's traditional medical plan. And last month, the company warned non-union workers they will soon pay even more of their health care costs. A study by the Center for Economic and Policy Research shows the effect is magnified when compared to states with few union workers. In South Carolina, site of that second 787 assembly line, about 1 in 20 workers is unionized. There, the average non-union hourly wage is $17.75. In Washington, where 1 in 5 workers is organized, the average union wage is $24.25. To Boeing, that means costs are higher here, and the pressures to cut costs these days are immense.
Because if we aren't competitive, it doesn't matter where we put the work. We won't get orders, and we'll be out of business, and that's not good for anybody.
The implications of these frictions go well beyond the Dreamliner. Boeing has said it will decide before the end of the year whether to re-engine or replace its best-selling 737, made here in Renton. Demand is growing for what could be a whole new plane, and that puts into play the future of the assembly line that's now in Renton.
There's not an entitlement here. I mean, every place, every location has to earn the right to do the next airplane.
The term I've heard is that we're going to have to earn the right to build that airplane. Well, we're building 31 airplanes a month right now out of that facility. I think that's earned the right to build another airplane.
You can imagine the anger if any 737 replacement would be built anywhere else. Still, 2 weeks ago, Boeing CEO Jim McNerney spoke to an international meeting of unions in Seattle that was closed to the press. He declined to speak to us, but the people who were in the room said he's sounding more conciliatory.
He's left the door open for moving forward and working together.
And Commercial Airplanes Chief Jim Albaugh also sounds conciliatory while keeping his options open.
I think we can negotiate a settlement here in 2012 with the IAM and also with SPIA.
Tom Robleski machinists celebrate their 75th anniversary this year. He is hopeful that the company and the union can still find common ground.
I just hope that the Boeing company wants to be here for the next 75 years in aerospace in this part of the country as well.
Washington State will be holding its breath to see what happens next. I'm Rick Price.
And while we wait to see what's next, we can tell you Boeing is the state's largest employer today.
Its presence in Washington results in nearly 4 jobs for every direct Boeing job. As of September 30th, Boeing employs 159,648 people, with 72,511 working here in Washington State.
We're back now with KIRO7's aviation analyst Scott Hamilton. And Scott, how likely is a strike in 2012?
It better not be likely, because if the strike happens in 2012, and remember there are 2 contracts up, IAM and SPIA. If a strike happens in 2012, that's going to be extremely detrimental to Puget Sound and to Boeing and to the workers.
That said, is there any way, I know you can't make guarantees, nobody can, but how do you get labor peace with management over a decade so that these planes can be built here in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, there really has to be a whole different outlook on the part of both sides about how they're going to handle their labor management relations. You have Boeing CEO Jim McNerney saying that the workers have to earn the next airplanes. Well, I think the fact that the workers are producing 31 737s a month, soon to be 38, and are finding the problems and fixing the problems on the 787, they've earned that. But at the same time, you can't have strikes happening every 3 years like we've had in this company.
All right, thank you, Scott. Next, aerospace across the state, a trip over the mountains. Is the future of flying really in eastern Washington?
The students going here have a lot of places to go after they've graduated.
It's amazing how things have changed since Boeing built its first plane in the early 1900s. This picture from the company shows one of the new 787 Dreamliners flying alongside its very first plane, the Model 40. The 1928 vintage plane is owned by a Spokane man. Now, most people don't think of Boeing and then have Spokane in mind.
But we found out even in this economy, if you want to find aerospace jobs, all you have to do is head east.
So we got to do the brakes.
Chris Cruson of Tacoma works with a team of fellow students in an aviation maintenance class at Spokane Community College. A former military helicopter mechanic at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Cruson is optimistic this training program will lead to a well-paying job in commercial aviation here on the other side of the state.
It's a pretty in-demand career, and a lot of people don't have any trouble finding a place to go after school.
Among them, recent graduate Dustin Magnus, who now works at a company called Absolute Aviation Services. He's bullish on aviation in general and the Spokane area in particular.
It's pretty positive. I mean, I was hired right out of school.
Spokane is Washington's second largest city and is second only to the Puget Sound area in aviation companies and jobs. Magnus is among 84,000 people employed at more than 80 aviation companies in the Spokane area. And both those numbers are going up despite the down economy. Those companies include giant factories like Triumph Composite Systems, which sprawls over 54 acres in the Spokane Valley. Triumph was once owned by Boeing, and the airplane giant remains its biggest customer. The 500 workers here fabricate composite floorboards for Boeing jets including the new 787 Dreamliner. They also make air ducts and other strong, lightweight parts for Boeing and other plane makers. Even at 2 shifts a day, 6 days a week, the company struggles to meet demand and is hiring nearly 100 more workers this year as the 787 takes flight.
When at night and you see an airline in the sky and it's flashing the white lights, this is what does the flashing.
Back at Absolute Aviation Services on the campus of the Spokane International Airport, co-owner Al Gar describes how his company specializes in repairing and refurbishing airplane parts that airlines used to throw away when they failed. One example, this burned-out wingtip strobe light that cost about $500 new.
You can see the reflector, the glass tube, see how clean it is. We do this for about half the price of new.
This unique business model saves the airlines millions of dollars and earns the company $3 million a year in revenues. The company has grown from just 2 employees 6 years ago to 32 now, including Dustin Magnus.
It's getting to be a more specialized field.
Other specialized companies are sprouting up in Spokane, many joining Absolute Aviation on the outskirts of the international airport. One is Associated Painters, about to move into a brand new hangar big enough to paint 2 737s at a time. The company is based in Everett, and Vice President Reed Freese says when the decision was made to expand, Spokane's vibrant aviation industry made it the obvious choice.
Eastern Washington has a very favorable, progressive business climate that is attractive to us.
An hour-and-a-half drive to the west lies Moses Lake, the other major aerospace center in eastern Washington. Grant County International Airport operates 5 runways, including the longest runway in the Northwest, running nearly 2.5 miles. What it doesn't have is commercial air service, a victim of the recession. The gleaming, nearly new terminal is virtually empty, its ticket counters abandoned. But that doesn't mean the airport isn't thriving.
Things have been going along well. We did not have any layoffs during the economic downturn.
That's because the military, Boeing, and commercial airlines pay to use Moses Lake's long runways for aircraft testing and pilot training. Those services and surrounding aviation businesses generate more than 1,000 jobs and nearly $3 million a year in revenues.
We're just going to remove it and then service it?
Small wonder Chris Cruson is so optimistic. She could have enrolled in a similar training course closer to her Western Washington roots, but she's chosen the lifestyle and job opportunities she's finding in Eastern Washington.
There's a lot of aviation in this area. It seems to be a pretty successful career around here.
It isn't just the business of aviation that's expanding in Eastern Washington. That mechanic training program at Spokane Community College is growing too. School officials are raising money for a new $15 million aerospace technology center at Spokane International Airport. It's expected to open by 2013.
Next, flying higher than a 787, a rare inside look at Boeing's new projects for militaries around the world.
Rockets, missiles, and military secrets. Welcome back. Boeing is more than passenger planes. The company provides military might for countries around the world.
KIRO7's Rick Price now with an exclusive look behind the scenes with Boeing and the planes that will win the wars of the future.
A Bomark missile test in the 1950s. This first long-range anti-aircraft missile in the world was also retiree Dick Ferguson's very first project at Boeing.
Without the military, I don't think the commercial side would have been as big.
Defense, always a presence at Boeing, kicked into high gear during World War II when the company built nearly 7,000 B-17 bombers. B-29s joined the fight in 1944. Striking over several thousand miles, they shortened the war, and with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, arguably ended it. The Cold War B-52 has fought far longer than its designers dreamed, from Vietnam in the 1960s to Iraq in 2003. It's still flying. And analyst Lauren Thompson says defense is still crucial for Boeing.
The idea behind being in defense and commercial is that when one market is up, the other will be down, so you get stable earnings over time.
Some of Boeing's defense work here includes a new generation radar and command jet based on the 737. Boeing is involved in drones here, too. In situ, a Bingen, which Boeing bought in 2008, makes the tiny Scan Eagle. Much bigger is the P-8A Poseidon, a new anti-submarine plane for the U.S. Navy based on the 737.
This bulge here is for the generators.
With bulges to fit military gear and antennas everywhere, the P-8 is a different breed of 737. It has a mid-sized body, an extended wing, and a bomb bay.
When you put a weapons bay in the middle of it, you have to take the load and go around with the structure, and so a major design and engineering effort to get that done.
The Navy wants 117 of these, decades of job security for the Renton plant.
You will see the P-8, variants of the P-8, and work on the P-8 Poseidon into the 2020s, maybe into the 2030s.
And for the first time, with the P-8, a military plane is being built in line alongside commercial jets on a new assembly line that's only separate for security. It was essential to the deal.
The U.S. Navy did not want to take a commercial airplane, cut it up, modify it, and accept the compromises that are inevitable.
Boeing hopes in-line will help sell other military 737s for many other missions. But there are risks in relying too much on the weapons business.
The problem with being in defense is there's only one customer, the government.
And sometimes getting to a deal with that one customer can be a long, strange trip. The longest and strangest has to do with a decision some regarded as a no-brainer: the urgent need to replace the Air Force's aging fleet of aerial refueling tankers.
KC-135 tankers were built in the Eisenhower and the Kennedy administrations. That makes them the oldest fleet of jets in the world, and they really, really need to be replaced.
Beginning during Vietnam, KC-135s changed the way the U.S. projects power. They let bombers strike harder over longer distances, a force multiplier. The September 11th terror attacks underlined the need for new tankers. The U.S. was on the brink of war in Afghanistan, and airlines were in crisis, a crisis for Boeing, too. Some in Congress had a solution: a 767 tanker lease deal.
And so Congress thought they could get a good deal from Boeing while helping the company in a crisis.
It's the most incredible ripoff that I have seen in over 20 years here.
But Senator John McCain hated the tanker lease, and the government overturned it in late 2003.
At the time the tanker lease was overturned, there was a big scandal involving Boeing about the hiring of a government purchasing official, and that all got caught up in the tanker competition in a way that made it harder to keep the lease on track.
The Pentagon opened a competition, and in 2008, the Airbus team won.
This is unbelievable. They talk about the American family and the American economy. Why are we spending our tax dollars on a French airplane?
Even now, it still stings.
And to produce a military product somewhere else just doesn't feel right. Even if you trust them and are friends and everything else, it doesn't feel right.
But then Boeing launched a protest, and the government concluded that the award had not been made properly.
Flight 4 F-22s en route for refueling.
Now, Boeing is offering a new 767 tanker, and it's planning to cut costs with P-8-style in-line manufacturing.
And allows us to go ahead and bid a very aggressive proposal against our competition.
Boeing points to this report it bought from Aero Strategy, an independent consultant. It says the 767-based tankers will save up to $36 billion in the next 40 years, as much as the tankers will cost.
This set of numbers provides full understanding of what our aircraft brings after you've acquired it.
The Air Force is slowly coming to the point where it can make a decision whether it wants a European or an American tanker. Here's the problem. If it doesn't pick the American tanker, it's not clear that Congress will pay the money to buy the European plane.
Lauren Thompson believes that if Airbus has more to win here, Boeing has more to lose than just a big sale.
But also, Airbus will set up manufacturing in the United States, which could be a bigger problem over the long run.
And the nation has much at stake here.
Nobody's ever flown a tanker or any other kind of jet for this long. If something goes wrong, it's going to be awfully hard to get to places like Afghanistan.
The next chapter in the tanker story will play out over the next month or so when the Air Force makes its decision. In Seattle, I'm Rick Price.
The nation's 9-year debate on how to replace the tankers is fueling the state U.S. Senate race. Democratic incumbent Patty Murray is clashing with Republican campaign rival Dino Rossi. Murray introduced legislation calling for the Pentagon to consider that Airbus has received subsidies which the World Trade Organization calls improper. Murray has also accused Rossi of wavering on the illegal subsidies question. Rossi rejected that characterization after Murray's criticism and says he agrees that Airbus subsidies should be taken into account in the tanker contract.
In the past month, we learned Boeing's Plant 2, located between Boeing Field and South Seattle's Duwamish River, is going to be demolished after 75 years. It's home to Rosie the Riveter, women who built thousands of World War II planes. The plant is a worn-down factory that helped make Seattle a wartime manufacturing giant and future aerospace leader.
Well, heck, they used to call this place Boeingville. Right. I mean, there was a day where you never even really talked about doing business with anybody else.
Right. But times change. Could Boeing leave Washington for good? And why Chinese plane makers may have their sights set on our state. Did you know you could soon take a flight into space?
Boeing said last month it will offer tourism flights aboard its Crew Space Transportation 100 spacecraft by the year 2015. Boeing will market the flights through Space Adventures, which has already flown 7 people to the space station. The CST-100 can carry 7 people at a time. It's still not clear how much the ticket price will be, but a trip aboard a Soyuz spacecraft last year reportedly cost between $30 to $35 million.
So what about Boeing's future right here in Washington? Right now, there's a move underway to make our state an aerospace hub, not just for Boeing, but for competing companies.
KIRO7 Morning News anchor Chris Egert sat down with the governor and other leaders about growing Washington's role around the world while still taking care of business here at home.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard the spacious cabin.
The good old days. The 707 proudly flown by Pan Am. Seattle was known around the world as Boeingville, and Boeing was the only game in town.
It was a pleasure to have you aboard our jet clipper. We hope to have you with us again soon. Thank you.
But that has indeed changed. Now there are local companies building parts for Airbus.
Where were you from? Washington State.
The governor herself recently traveled to Asia to peddle Washington-grown potatoes and, among other things, court a Chinese aviation company called Comac that's trying to build a plane to compete with the Renton-built 737.
We're still, in my opinion, the home of Boeing. Boeing is a major company in Washington State, a great corporate citizen, a driver of our economy, making the best airplanes in the world, and we're going to promote Boeing every single day of the week. But we also have one of the most vibrant aerospace industries as a whole to be found anywhere in the United States.
Gregoire tells me this state got quite the economic eye-opener when Boeing announced it would build the second 787 line in South Carolina, not Everett. And despite her formation of a Washington Council on Aerospace, hours of lobbying, both publicly and privately, Boeing did it anyway.
Well, I have to defer to what I've been told by the CEOs. Both the current CEO and the immediate past CEO. And I was told very bluntly there was nothing more you could have done by both. They made the decision, they made it on multiple factors, and they said there was nothing the state could have done.
I did everything in my power to bring awareness to the issue back in December of 2000 and actually December 2008. My State of the County address was almost 90% dedicated to the potential loss of a second line of the 787. I met with every prominent elected official and expressed my concern. I brought people together and communicated what I saw in the aerospace indices. And unfortunately, it wasn't until again June where it was kind of taken seriously by those who could have influenced dramatically the outcome of that decision.
Snohomish County Executive Aaron Reardon was hailed as a champion of landing the first 787 line. As a state senator in 2003, he helped write legislation to provide tax incentives for aerospace companies. The executive feels that nothing has been done to make the environment more competitive since he was in Olympia.
They have to break out of that framework and recognize the long-term growth of the economy is what's going to solve the budget problems in Olympia. It's going to put people back to work, and it's going to allow us to be a competitive state and grow new lines of business in every sector, aerospace included.
Over the course of the last several months, I've talked to numerous people about what they think needs to happen, where things need to go, and I've heard a lot of people pointing fingers at Olympia. Things need to happen in Olympia, Olympia, Olympia. You're in Olympia. What needs to happen in Olympia?
Well, I think there's two or three things. Really when we did the initial assessment of where we were not competitive back in 2003 for the initial Dreamliner line, our employee costs were quite high, and that's things like unemployment insurance and workers' comp insurance and so forth. I think the second thing is that I'm looking at in particular right now, I think it's not been fulfilled to what our expectations in the legislature were, is some of the subcontracting manufacturing jobs. Boeing went to this worldwide supplier model. I think by almost everybody's accounts, that has not worked well. They're probably going to come back for the 737 replacement and do a single campus operation again. Our B&O tax is very onerous for that type of operation because it's on a gross receipts. And whether you make money or not, you get taxed with the B&O tax. But worse than that, if you're a manufacturer, if I make a part that goes into a GE engine that then goes on a Boeing plane, that gets taxed at all three places until it gets put on the plane and when Boeing sells the plane in the end.
Mount Vernon State Representative Jeff Morris says he hopes that he and his colleagues in the legislature can find a way to make the business environment better during this upcoming session. But last year surprised many by introducing a bill to channel Boeing's tax exemptions if any 787 assembly line in Washington fall below 50% its total production. Essentially punish Boeing for moving business out of our state. It failed, but did send a clear message.
This is not a one-company town any longer.
I've been vocal in the respect that Boeing is a Chicago company now, not a Washington State company, and we need to operate differently today than we have in the past.
Republican State Senator Mike Hewitt of Walla Walla and Democrat Jeff Morris do agree on that. But what both sides have historically not agreed on is the best way to address workers' compensation and regulatory reform. Hewitt believes Olympia has a legitimate shot at passing regulatory reform this session, not necessarily because of a willingness for lawmakers to work together, but because the Republicans have a legitimate chance to take over power.
I think the political climate in Olympia will be different than it has been for the last 4 years, and so the public debate will be better now. It will be much more open, and the dialogue will be there.
Whether the Democrats are in control of the House or the Senate or the Republicans are, I expect us to get reform when it comes to workers' compensation this year.
What's it all mean to the non-aerospace crowd? A lot. Look no further than Common Ground Coffee Shop in downtown Renton.
My uncle works for Boeing, my family's worked for Boeing, so I hear about it all the time. So if someone gets laid off or they go on strike, it really affects everyone kind of personally. It's not just like business, like people are worried about how they're going to pay rent and not too worried about spending money on cupcakes when that happens.
The ultimate icing on the economic cake? Try and do right by Boeing, while at the same time convincing companies around the world that Washington workers can and should be part of the aerospace global supply chain. A Washington business, bon appetit. I'm Chris Egert.
So you've heard from the politicians, the unions, and from Boeing.
Next, our independent analyst explains what should happen in the coming year and how it will affect the entire Washington economy.
Well, joining us once again is our aviation analyst, Scott Hamilton. And Scott, when you look ahead at the next 10 to 20 years, who do you see as our biggest competition, our biggest threat in terms of being an aerospace leader?
Most people would say Airbus, but I'm going to say China. The Chinese people are very patient people, and when they set a national goal, they will take forever to meet that goal. They waited 99 years to get Hong Kong back. They want a viable commercial aerospace industry. 25 or 30 years is nothing to them to get that.
What do we need to do to compete?
We need to really beef up our education here in Washington. There is a worldwide shortage of aerospace engineers. Boeing has been talking about this for years. There is a shortage of trained mechanical, technical people. Those are the people who fix the airplanes, they build the airplanes. We need to beef up that here in this state, regardless of our budgetary problems.
So finally, all we've been talking about this hour, Boeing and beyond. What is the future of aerospace here in the Pacific Northwest?
There is no reason why the Pacific Northwest still cannot be the aerospace epicenter in the world. It's going to take a change in labor management relations. It's going to take a improvement in the business climate. You know, as we compete these days, we're not only competing against the global economy, we're also competing against the U.S. South.
All right, Scott, thank you so much.
One of the things that Boeing's Jim Albaugh and Governor Gregoire wanted to focus on is education. And that's pretty important when you consider that today's fifth grader could be building airplanes in a decade.
You can find extended interviews with the newsmakers on that subject at KIRO.tv.com.
Thanks for joining us for our KIRO7 News Special, Boeing and Beyond, the future of flight in our state.